you've been on the internet for a hot second, you probably were told that your podcast is amazing for your brand's SEO. But how does that actually work? And if you haven't heard about the term SEO, or you've heard it like being tossed around, but you're not sure what it means, is search engine optimization. So basically the process that makes sure that your website is relevant to the search query and that people can find your content. And I've talked and touched a little bit on previous episodes on the importance of podcast SEO and the fact that you need to have a website for your podcast in order for people to find you. And so I thought, well, who would be a good fit to talk about SEO in a way that, one, is actionable and could be fun? Well, then I didn't have to scour the internet for a long time because I remembered Sarah McDowell. So Sarah is an SEO expert. She's been working in SEO since 2012, so for a while. And she's also a podcaster herself. She's a host of the show, the SEO Mindset Podcast. The podcast is actually for SEO experts, but I heard Sarah speak on this conference that both of us were panelists at, and I thought, well, she would be so great at explaining not only the, tidbits of like the basics of what SEO is, but actually provide you with actionable tips to implement on your podcast and to talk about all of these things that we keep hearing on the internet. So, do transcripts really make a difference in being discovered online or not? What should you write on your show notes? How long should your show notes be? Should you do internal linking? What is internal linking? A lot of good stuff came up. And so I decided in the moment to break the interview into parts. So this first part is more about like the principles of SEO and like, day-to-day things that you should care about. And then on the second part, we covered a bit more on the multimedia side of SEO. So basically images, videos, things like that. And I loved Sarah's tidbits because we covered not only like the best practices, but also almost like the lazy practices, things that you can implement, today, next week, and that don't overwhelm you, but really make sure that your podcast is getting discovered by the right people. So I can't wait for you to dive into this episode and make sure that you listen to episode 42, which will be linked in the show notes. Share with us your ahas and enjoy the podcast. I'm Anna Xavier, and this is the Podcast Space, a podcast that is made to get you unstuck and elevate your podcast journey. Let's get into it. Sarah, I am so thrilled to have you on the show because we're going to be covering all practical tips for SEO for podcasters, how they can benefit from it. I promise that everyone listening in, this is going to be a conversation that you're going to be following up and you can like pause and implement, and you're not going to be stressed out and overwhelmed with all the terms. Sarah is so good at explaining every single bit of SEO in ways that are so amazing for podcasters. So I'm thrilled to have her with us on the show. Welcome, Sarah.
Well, what a very lovely welcome that was, Anna. Thank you very much.
Well, of course, that's the least I could do. I've been seeing what you post. I love what you do. And so I also listen to your podcast, even though it's not for me, but I was like, let me listen to this. Let me follow along. So I knew that you would be the perfect person to talk about SEO for podcasters. So yes.
Well, yeah, I'm very excited. I mean, two of my passions, this is going to make me sound boring. I have more passions, but in this context, two of my passions, podcasting and search engine optimization. So I'm very excited that we get to nerd out. But as you said, Anna, I will be really mindful of the lingo. I'll rein the lingo in.
Yeah, so it's going to be like acronym town where people are like, what are they even talking about?
I have a love-hate relationships with acronyms. Like, sometimes it's like, did you even need to put an acronym in there? Like, and even the word itself is hard to say. But anyway.
Awesome. All right. So there are so many different types of SEO strategies or SEO actions that our audience can take as a podcaster. And so there's multiple different ways. And so I would love for us to go through this conversation where we kind of tackle the, like the lazy podcaster SEO strategy, where like you're having small wins, but also like the over the top dedicated podcaster who is like, all right, give me all the tips. So every time we're talking about something, Sarah, I would love for you to touch on like the, low effort and the high effort. So can we do that?
Oh, 100%, 100%. Yeah, because then that's super actionable, because as independent podcasters and creators, which I am one of, time, we don't have a lot of it, do we? So we need to be efficient. So yeah, I'm on board for that.
Yes, wonderful. All right. And so let's start with, the different types of SEO strategies that people can have as a podcaster. We're starting with, the most common ones to the ones that most people may not know about.
Okay. Yes, definitely. So to kick things off, the most sensible place to start is you need a website. Yeah. Okay. So
preach.
So just to touch on what the goal is with podcast SEO. So search engine optimization generally is where you are doing tactics and methods to your website so that Google deems you as relevant when people are searching for certain terms that you should be coming up for in its search engine results pages, right? And also something to bear in mind as well is first bit of lingo, but I will explain. But obviously Google has an algorithm, and basically what Google's algorithm is like a checklist. So when Google is looking and accessing website pages, it kind of has a checklist that it goes through. So I suppose when we are doing SEO, we're trying to tick as many boxes as we can, okay? Because we want to be, because at the end of the day, Google is an organization, and it cares about user experience. It cares about its customers. So all these things in the checkbox is making sure that the content that it is giving to its users is helpful, it's relevant, it's not spammy, it's answering the questions. So I think that is worthwhile me clearing up and saying in the first place. So that's SEO generally. When we talk about podcast SEO, so obviously when it comes to discoverability of your podcast, there's lots of different ways that people can come across you. Yeah. It's not just about people going into the apps like Spotify, Amazon Music. Yes, people will do that, but there's such there's more opportunity. And I just want to share one stat with you. So I'm using a keyword research tool, and we'll probably get into keyword research tools later. But I'm using SEMrush, and if I just look at the keyword best podcasts, for example, that gets 63.1k monthly searches on average. Okay. And that's obviously, there's lots of different variants of best podcast. So it could be best music podcast, best comedy podcast, all of that. But I wanted to share that with your listeners, Anna, to sort of show you there is appetite for people going to Google to find podcasts, right? So when we talk about podcast SEO, it's what can we do with our podcast to make sure that we can be found when people are searching for relevant terms in Google, okay? So first things first, we need to have a website, because Google needs a website. It needs pages for it to come across so they can show you. Does that all make sense so far, Anna?
Yes. And I keep thinking, I keep wanting to interrupt you because I have like a gazillion comments that I want to make, but I'm like, nope, hold it in. And just on that, all of that is making sense. But I just want to challenge the listener right now. If you've been wanting to start a website, but you're like too unsure, like websites are free. Like you can start with a really simple website. But again, like it's 2023. Like if you don't have a website, it's almost like you don't, like, I don't know, like, do you exist? Like, it's such a, if all you do is just having your podcast on the podcast apps, there's just that, like, kind of thought. I was like, they don't even have a website? Like, just from the get-go, your listeners are like, like, what do I search if I want to know more about you? Like, what's that information? So even from that point, you're setting yourself up from your competition just by having a website. So like, not even getting to anything else, because there's so many people who still like don't want to do a website. I don't know why this is a thing still, but it's still a thing. Okay, great. So, all right. So we want to give Google all of these like best practices to find us. And
sorry, were you go? Did I cut you off then?
No, I was just going to say, so tell us more.
So tell us more. One thing that I will say is Captivate have a lot of wonderful features, but they have something called Captivate websites, Captivate sites. So at a click of a button, you can have yourself a website. And I use that for the SEO Mindset podcast. So it is super easy. So you can either go down that route, but there's loads of easy to use CMS systems now, like WordPress, Wix, Squarespace. Like, it's so easy to get yourself a website. Do you know what I mean? Like,
and I agree. A lot of podcast platforms, I feel like, okay, not all of them, but I do like that. Some podcast platforms do have that option, so that whenever you're looking, okay, I don't just want to have my episodes, I want to have something else, like that's a possibility. Like there's links to your social media and all that, and that helps people find your podcast. So okay, awesome. Yes. Yeah. Let's go into, the next step. All right. So we know.
So you've got your website. We know it's important, and you're right. Great, Sarah. Now what? Where do we start? So first things first is keywords, right? So keywords are basically the search terms and queries that people use when they're in search engines like Google, okay? So we need to be smart. And when we are planning our episodes, we need to be using some sort of keyword research tool to help us plan our episodes, because one, we can make sure that we're using the right terminology, because I might call something different to what someone or the population or like the majority, that's the word that I was thinking of. So I might know something as something different, but actually there's a more common term or a more common query that is used. But you can also make sure that you're talking about topics that are relevant to your audience, okay? So at the very bare minimum, so those people who don't have a lot of time, you're going to be planning your podcast episodes anyway. So this actually saves you time, right? Because rather than you sitting there and having a bit of writer's block or being like, oh, I wonder what it is, like you can physically use a keyword research tool, and there's loads out there. Some are free, some you have to pay for. Basically, the more you pay for a keyword research tool, the more fancy stuff that it does. But at the bare minimum, every keyword research tool will do this one thing that you need to do, and that is to put in a topic, and then it will give you what people are actually searching for in Google, because it has that data, okay? So that's a no-brainer, because so some really cool tools. So I've already spoke about SEMrush, so that's a paid for tool. But some really cool free tools is a tool called Also Asked. So
I've heard about that one.
Yeah, so Also Asked gets its data from, people also ask in Google search results.
Like suggested like searches? Is that what you're talking about?
No. That's something else. So when you do a search and you're later on, you've got like that little box that comes up.
Oh, yes. And it has drop-down menus.
Yes. Yeah. So that's where Also Ask gets that data from. Okay. So you put in your topic, and I use this all the time, and it's really good for me because so many times it will come up with topics or queries or things that I've never really thought about, or actually I thought this was just a one-parter, but there's actually quite a lot to talk about. I need to do part 1, part 2, part 3, and you're using the terms that people are searching for in Google, right? So that's Also Asked. And there's also Answer the Public. So Answer the Public, so when you are typing into Google and it auto suggests you, like it finishes that sentence for you, or it finishes that query, that's where Answer the Public gets its data from. Yeah.
Oh, okay. That's a good insider tip. All right, cool.
So there's some also ads to the public. You can pay for them, but they're also free. Basically, just do a search on Google and review. Just see what tools come up and look at the features, see budgets, and I'm not here to help you decide what keyword research tool, because there's loads out there. But once you've got that, we need to make sure that we're putting these keywords in the right places. So you need to make sure that it's in your episode page title. You need to make sure that it's in your show notes, on your website, on your individual pages of your website. It will need to go into the meta page title and the meta page description. Now, they're different to your episode title that show up in the apps, because those are what gets shown on Google. So when you're searching in Google and you get the blue clickable link and the description underneath, that's what I'm talking about there.
It's almost like a preview of what people will see on the page. And that's why you 100%. Should actually write it, because people will write it. Because sometimes if you don't do this, it will show up like gibberish. It will be like a combination of multiple things. And you're like,
Yeah. And that's because Google is looking for the first thing on its page, on your page, to populate that, or it will try and guess it for you. Because there's been times where I've put in a meta description, but Google's just gone off on one and done it himself. But that's something that you can't control, because Google, depending on what someone has searched for, Google might be like, actually, this is a more relevant meta description to put in, sort of thing.
Okay, so I need to stop you, because a few things came up that I was like, I really want to ask you. So I love what you said about the importance of actually researching the topic, and that happens to me all the time. So when I'm looking at episode ideas, because my first language is not English, a lot of times I go into, either some of these tools. I use Google search, not Google search. What
Trends?
is the term? Trends. Thank you. I was like, I know which one. Forgot. Anyway, so because as I am going through some ideas, sometimes, again, you talked about the terms. Sometimes it's I try to talk in layman's terms as much as possible, because my audience, it just makes it easy to follow along, whether you're an expert or not an expert. It doesn't matter. But even when I'm thinking about the run of the show, I sometimes do that just because I know that sometimes there's blind spots, and you don't realize that actually, as an expert, my podcast is about podcasting. It's about content strategies. It's about how to elevate a show. But there are always things that I know, but that I never thought about mentioning. And doing one of these searches sometimes shifts the whole episode, the angle of the whole episode, and makes it way more powerful. You're going to say something?
Well, yeah, because I just wanted to add on to that point, because if you're an expert or you're knowledgeable in the field, there's some stuff that you'd just be like, oh, that's common knowledge. But actually it's not. And it's not until you use these tools that that you see, oh, people are actually asking questions about what this is. I just took it as verbatim that people knew what it was, podcast SEO. I don't need to explain that because people know what that is. No, because it's different from traditional website SEO. Do you know what I mean? So yeah, I just wanted to agree very long-windedly with your comment.
No, but it's true. I feel like sometimes, especially, and I talk about this all the time, who are you creating content for? You have to be really, I'd say really be one of these people that you have to be strong-headed and just say, okay, I know my audience, I know what they need, and it's not about me showcasing my expertise to my peers if your audience aren't your peers. And if you have to talk in language that is accessible and feels a little the term isn't dumbed down, because I feel like that's a stupid expression, because it feels wrong. But to maybe level down the expertise that you have, it's about making sure that you're found by the people who are in the journey where they need you, and not necessarily your peers. I feel like that's such a big mistake that people say, oh, nobody can find me. And I'm like, this title, and this is something that I talk about on my consulting with clients as well. Like, okay, you've told me all about your goals for the podcast, and none of the content aligns with the type of journey that your listener is in. You're creating content for, the peers or for people who are in the same level as you. And like, of course, your ideal client isn't going to find you because the words you're using, they're just not there. So 100%. That makes a lot of sense. I have to ask you one thing. This is my pet peeve. So people that start their podcast show notes with, in this episode of the podcast space, and Xavier is joined by Sarah to talk about SEO. Okay, there's so many things that I hate about this, and I mean,
tell me,
share.
Ben.
and you tell me if they're kind of like, if they have foundation to work on or not. I think about user experience so much and listener experience. When you look on the apps, these whole sentence I just said normally covers up every single information that the listener may need in order to make that decision. Do I want to listen to this episode or not? Especially if the title is super vague. Like I did, by the way, I will make in the show notes a link to the episode that I covered about titles and how I think like most people should look into titles, but SEO is one of the reasons. But what are your thoughts? Because sometimes even people put like, this episode sponsor is X. And so you literally have absolutely no insightful information on what the show, that episode is about specifically.
Really good point, because it's wasted space at the end of the day is what, So you need to be, and I didn't think about that. So, because when I'm coming from it from an SEO perspective, I'm thinking of Google and like, but you've made such a valid point, because when you're in the listener apps, it's the same with like your artwork as well, or like having individual episode artwork, like they're really small. So you need to make it scannable. Like the text needs to be big. Like you need to be able for people to see what that podcast episode is about and stuff. So yeah, no brainer. And I completely get that. Obviously if you've got a sponsor, you probably need to have your sponsor information in your show notes, but maybe just lower down, use the show notes as a hook is what we're saying, isn't it? Use it as a hook first to get people excited and wanting to listen to your episode. And I'm all for cutting out waffle, get to the point.
Yes.
And also there was, so people scan. People don't read nowadays. They just scan. And there's something about making sure, because people have different levels of reading ability. Okay. So I've got this, I don't know where this has come from in my head, but I've got this random fact that you should always write for a 9-year-old, because then you cover in all basis of people's reading and writing. So yeah, I'm on that. Okay. Cut the waffle. Don't cut the keywords. Don't cut the phrases that we need. But yeah, like if you've got stuff in there that can be axed, it's not really helping you. It's just taking up space. Yeah. Like
okay, so if we are all right, quick yes or no, and then so that I can make my point. So if people want to duplicate the show notes, we're talking about like the lazy podcaster's guide to SEO. Okay. If they're copying the show notes and they taking it from their podcast hosting platform to their website, should we have them like keywords? Like, does Google care about having keywords higher up on the show notes?
I'd kind of say would be older school mentality. So back in the day when Google, way back when, like keywords were the be all and end all. So like it was like exact match keywords. So making sure that the keyword was exactly the same and it was in the first sentence. And like obviously you want to try and get it in as soon as you can, but SEO should never hinder user experience or grammar. Do you know what I mean? Like it should never get in the way. Like obviously you need to have your keywords and your phrases in there so Google knows. And also like I think if someone searches for a keyword and they physically see that keyword as well, there is that recognition. But SEO should never get in the way of user experience or the quality of your content.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so what would you say then are the best practices for like three top things that our listeners need to do in their show notes so that Google can, people who are searching for that topic finds their content?
So top three things. So in your show notes, what I'd always recommend is keywords. So yeah, get them in there. If you can, use subheadings as well, and use subheadings to use synonyms of keywords. So a synonym, it's a 50% chance whether I'm going to get that right or not, because that's an awful word to try and say. Like synonyms, I always want to say synonym. Yeah. And so synonyms are words that are similar to a keyword. So obviously people search in different ways. Okay. So another really good tip is like when you're doing your keyword research, pick out the synonyms that are saying basically the same thing, but just a bit different. So if you can get them in as well, and in your subheadings, and research links, I would say is another good one. So obviously we know that Google wants to know that it can trust the content, or it can trust what it's putting out in front of its users. So one thing that we can do that is if we've got research links, and the research links are going out to studies for and they're authoritative, they're trustworthy, like they've got gov.uk in the URL, or it's like Edison Research, those sort of things. It's going to help with the authority and trust of that podcast episode, because Google will be like, okay, because that's a thing, going back to Google's algorithm in the checkbox. That's another thing that it could look for. So you're basically covering your back, saying like what we're saying in this episode or this content is backed up by research. Yeah, some pages might have a better authority because it's been a while, it's been around for a while longer, it's gathered up more backlinks, so other people that are linking out to that resource. But I wouldn't necessarily always say older is better. Also, it could be out of date as well.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? Like, so as long as it's relevant and it's from a reputable source.
Because I hear a lot of people are saying like, oh, this is a very new page, so I'm not sure if I should link it to that. But okay, so it's more like about how trustworthy is the website in general. So they should have like that authority, their domain authority in general, versus how old the page is.
Yeah, I think that's, for me, that would be a wrong thing to be looking at. I'd be looking at relevancy as well, and who's put this research together. Just because it's new doesn't mean that it shouldn't be linked to, and you never know. Like, it could be like in a couple of years' time be the one thing that everyone's linking to anyway. So yeah, like I wouldn't get too hung up on old means better, if that makes sense.
Got it. Perfect. Actually, funny enough, some of my pages of content that I've created in the beginning of launching the podcast space, they rank on the first search page on Google, which I'm like, hello. And I'm like ahead of companies that are like podcast companies and places that are like very known. And I was like, how did I do this?
So this is new pages that you
2020 by now. These are like, I'd say like 3 years is old enough, but like they ranked pretty early on. So anyway, so is this?
Well, I mean, that's an interesting point to say. Like, Google is always changing up what it's showing in its search engine results pages, right? So if you look at what you get shown today, it's going to be different tomorrow, next week, okay? Because Google is constantly like showing different search results. And that's one thing that I always say, like, you don't want to get too hung up on. So if you are tracking your keywords, like if you drop one position one day, then you go back up the next day and then you drop.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? Like, these little fluctuations are going to happen all the time because Google is testing different content out. Like, it's testing the waters, basically testing what's resonating with people. like what's better to look at is like on a monthly basis, is there a trend of your content going down? Because then that's something more to look at. But another point to make on that is, so one thing that I would recommend that podcasters do is, so most people are aware of Google Analytics, but what some people aren't aware of is another tool, free tool by Google called Google Search Console.
I looked that up just yesterday. Yes, it's so easy to use. It's great.
So with Google Search Console, you can do that. So what I do with my so when I publish a new episode for my SEO Mindset podcast and it goes on the website, I'll then go to Google Search Console and I will there's a tool in Google Search Console called Inspection Tool or something similar like that. You paste your URL in there, and basically, so the proper terms is you're asking Google to index. So what you've got to think, so Google is like a library, yeah? And the books in the library are your website pages, and and the pages in the book are individual pages and stuff. So when you're using that inspection tool in Google Search Console and you've got a new page, Google might not have had a chance to come across it yet. So if you're requesting indexing in Google Search Console, you're speeding up that process. You're saying, hey, Google, I've got a new page on my website. Please, can you index it, basically? So that just speeds up that process. And because Google's liking new content, you never know, like it might test the water and put you on the first page to see how it interacts with its people and stuff.
Yes. Thank you for sharing that, because that's one of the most practical ways. And at the back of that, I have to ask you, if you are internal linking, so let's say, like this episode will have links to other episodes that I just mentioned, like the title episode. I'll have an episode on like website must-haves. Like things to have on your website. Like, how does Google read that? And is that important to help Google find new pages apart 100%. From like listeners?
100%. So internal linking. So I think when people first think about SEO, they think about backlinks. They think about external website and pages linking to you. But what is just as important is your internal linking. So you need to make sure that your different individual episode pages are being linked from other places, because you're helping Google discover those episodes, but you're also helping users as well. But going back to the Google point, by internal linking, you're saying, Google, these are important. You need to factor these in. So something that I would use, or how would I say this? What you need to try and figure out, and there's lots of tools out there to do this. I use Screaming Frog, and Screaming Frog, I mean, all these SEO tools have like weird and wonderful names. Don't ask me about it.
Yeah. I was just thinking, it's like, wow.
But Screaming Frog is basically a website crawler. So with Screaming Frog, it's a tool that you put in your URL and it crawls all your website pages, and it will tell you if there's any issues. Screaming Frog is free up to like so many pages. I think if you've got no more than 500 pages, you can use Screaming Frog for free. But what you can do is you can use Screaming Frog to find orphan pages. And basically what orphan pages are any pages that aren't being linked to. So if you're finding that like some of your episodes need a bit more love, they're not getting as much traction, or they're not getting as many listens or downloads as the other ones, something that you could do is use something like Screaming Frog, find these pages and start linking to them from other episode show notes. So 100%, that's a great tactic.
And that gives you more listeners, plays, and downloads per episode. Like every single time I say, hey, by the way, if you like this episode, listen to that, because I go in more detail. People will listen to those episodes. Yeah. I always see it when I'm looking at my analytics dashboard. I see the path of like this episode and this episode got played. I'm like, yes, because they're connected.
And also as well, like people who come across your content for the first time, they might go through a bit of like a wanting to binge. So they listen to your first episode and they're like, oh, I want more. So you're actually helping them do that, because you're saying, if you like this episode, then you need to check this one out. And it's in the show notes. So yeah. Something else that we need to talk about is transcriptions.
There you go. That's exactly what I was going to ask you about.
We're on the same wavelength, Anna,
Yes.
like telepathically. Transcriptions are important from an accessibility standpoint anyway. We should be doing that anyway for accessibility reasons. But it can also help Google. So because what a transcript does is convert your audio into text, obviously you're giving more content for Google to come across and index and read. And basically you're helping Google know more about your podcast episode. Yeah. Like there is a debate whether Google is automatically transcribing or not. But even if it is automatically transcribing, if you've ever used a transcription tool, they get it wrong. Do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, exactly.
yeah?
That's true.
So don't leave it up for chance. And so what you need to make sure as well, because I was having this conversation with someone, is your transcription needs to be like physically available as text on your page, because sometimes you'll have the transcription in the web player and Google won't see that. Equally, if you say, okay, I'll make a transcription available as a downloadable PDF or a downloadable Word document, again, that's going to give you no SEO benefit because to that page, because Google can't see that transcript there.
Perfect. That was so great. I'm realizing that we talked about so much already, and I'm like, we still have so much to talk about.
Can I just
Sarah,
say one more thing about the Sorry, I know. But while we are talking about transcriptions, it sort of links back to my earlier point about like doing your keyword research as well. Because if you're doing your keyword research beforehand, then when you record your episode, you're going to be organically saying the keyword anyway. So then when you put your transcription on the page, it's only going to help you out more, sort of thing. That's the only other thing that I wanted to say.
That is such a valid point, because it will be in your awareness, so it's not like an awkward thing where your like show notes don't match what you're seeing on the episode. That makes so much sense.
Yeah, yeah. And one thing with keywords. Sorry, I just want to make like. So there's a term called keyword stuffing. So I've seen it where like some podcast episodes will just be a list of keywords and synonyms, or like the show notes or the transcription will just be very awkward because they're just getting keywords in for the sake of it. You don't want that. Like back in the day, keyword stuffing worked. So I remember seeing pages rank where they'd literally have a white page and they'd put text in white and they'd just keyword stuff. And
I've seen that. I wonder what that was about. Okay. That's a big no-no now. Oh my God.
But obviously people aren't going to do that nowadays. But it's a point about, so SEO should never get in the way of your users. It should never get in the way of your content, because at the end of the day, as Google has developed and got more mature and more sophisticated, it's all about the user experience. So if you're doing something against that, you kind of see how that's kind of shooting yourself in the foot. So obviously it's good to know about the keyword or like the terms or the synonyms, because you're more naturally going to say it anyway. But if you're feeling like it's awkward, or your show notes don't kind of flow quite right, or do you know what I mean? Like then you're doing the wrong thing, basically.
That makes so much sense. Okay, so thank you for covering transcripts. In terms of, not considering accessibility, because that's super important, try to provide content in all ways. But in terms of like the lazy graph of SEO, where does the transcript stand?
Okay, so low effort would be every time you record a podcast episode, you you transcribe it and you tidy it up. Okay, so you look out for any mistakes, any spelling mistakes, and take out filler words. So that's low effort. If you've got a bit more time and you want to do more, what you can then use your transcript to do is turn that transcript into a blog. Yeah. And so obviously you can't just copy and paste a transcript as an article, as a blog, because that just wouldn't make sense and it wouldn't rank.
Nobody will read that.
It wouldn't be quality. So take the transcript and revamp it. So give it a structure, give it introduction, write an article, basically make it good, and post that on your podcast website, because then you've repurposed your content. And once you've got that on your website as a blog, embed that episode, because that's another way that people can discover your content. So someone might be searching the web and come across your blog post, and they weren't even in the mindset to listen to a podcast, but they wanted to know about, I don't know, give me any topic, Anna. Like, they wanted to know how to knit a scarf, right?
Yes. We need it. Yeah.
I'm very aware that knitting a scarf, you probably need a visual, so maybe YouTube is better. But anyway, that was the only thing that came to my head. But yeah, they wanted to know about something. So they've typed it into Google, then they're ready to read an article, but then they see that it's an episode and they're like, actually, I prefer listening to my content. So you've just got yourself another listener. So that's your low effort, high effort. So low effort, at the very bare minimum, get a transcript on your episode page, tidy it up. If you've got a bit more time and want to use your transcript even more, convert it into a blog.
Yes, and so tools to make the transcript, Otter.ai, Descript.
Yeah.
And do you have a favorite one?
I'm using Voice Quill at the moment because I was using Poddin before, and that was because, so my friend Danny, he has a very thick Scottish accent, so he's always struggled with transcription services because always get it wrong. But he was like, Sarah, Podding is the one that's the most accurate for me so far. But then Podding went away and Voice Quill came about, so I use Voice Quill. That seems to work quite nice. So.
Got it. My gosh, these episodes is going to be jam-packed with just like resources. That's all good. So Sarah, I feel like this episode needs to have a part 1 and part 2, because otherwise listeners are going to be so overwhelmed. So I'm going to challenge us to do a part 2, which is going to be just focused on YouTube and more like on the YouTube and images SEO. That way we can actually like split that up and people can listen to what they've learned in this episode, and then they can go into the second one, because I think otherwise it's going to be a lot.
Yes, 100%. And I'm very aware, because I like to talk as well and give examples. So I've probably gone off on tangents as well. So I do apologize.
That's all good. Do not apologize for giving us knowledge. Absolutely not. So that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to stop this recording right now. And everything that we mentioned will be in the show notes. And so just make sure that you listen to the next episode where we'll be delving into the more multimedia side of things. And you can just break it down and take a rest, because otherwise your brain's going to explode with so much information. All right. I'll see you in the next episode. Keep creating content that's imperfect but moves you forward.